Imagine a completely empty room containing only the physical things required to keep your biological body alive. Contrast that stark room with the space you currently inhabit, filled with objects, subscriptions, and modern comforts. A common misconception is that a remarkably high income automatically creates permanent financial freedom for an individual. The mathematical truth is that wealth is simply the silent margin between what you earn and what you consume. Today, we confront the foundational skill of financial independence, which is the relentless separation of needs and wants. First, we will examine how the definition of a basic necessity has shifted dramatically throughout human history. Second, we will explore the deep psychological triggers that trick our brains into perceiving desires as immediate survival requirements. Third, we will deconstruct the core principles required to categorize your own consumption habits with absolute clarity. Finally, we will establish a conceptual framework to apply this vital distinction without sacrificing the sheer joy of living. Why does this fundamental concept matter so urgently in our current era of relentless hyperconsumerism? Never before in human history has society possessed such a frictionless path to instant gratification and digital purchasing. Billions of dollars are spent annually by marketing institutions specifically designed to blur the line between luxury and necessity. This constant visual bombardment leads directly to lifestyle inflation, where every increase in earnings triggers an equal increase in spending. Consequently, a professional can earn $500,000 a year and still live desperately from paycheck to paycheck. True wealth cannot begin to multiply until you build a psychological fortress against these external consumption pressures. To thoroughly understand our modern dilemma, we must look back to the early 20th century and the birth of mass production. In the year 1920, automated American factories produced goods much faster than the public naturally needed them. The corporate solution was the invention of modern advertising, designed by early pioneers to artificially manufacture continuous desire. Prior to the year 1929, people primarily purchased manufactured items based strictly on utility and functional replacement. However, the massive post-war economic boom of 1945 initiated the modern era of consumer identity. A profound cultural shift occurred where individuals began to express their social status through the accumulation of highly specific brands. What was universally considered an extravagant luxury in one decade slowly transitioned into an absolute baseline expectation in the next. Think deeply about indoor plumbing, electricity, and the automobile, which all evolved from exclusive novelties to absolute daily requirements. History consistently reveals that our baseline for satisfaction constantly increases, making the finish line for material desires a moving target. Let us dive deep into the strict biological definitions versus the highly flexible societal definitions of a true necessity. In pure biological terms, your needs are remarkably simple, consisting primarily of water, calories, safe shelter, and basic protective clothing. A want is simply an elevated, highly specific preference for exactly how that fundamental biological need is delivered or experienced. You absolutely need calories to fuel your daily metabolic functions, but you strongly want a dry-aged steak at a premium restaurant. You need a reliable method of motorized transportation to reach your workplace, but you passionately want a luxury imported sedan. You need insulated clothing to protect your fragile body from the harsh environment, but you want a highly specific designer label. The ultimate financial danger lies in the gray area, which we call the upgraded need, where expensive wants masquerade as essential requirements. An upgraded need is particularly dangerous because it neatly bypasses our mental filters, easily justifying an expensive luxury as a baseline necessity. Consciously recognizing this subtle transition from basic utility to experiential preference is the crucial first layer of mastering your capital. Why do our highly evolved human brains struggle so immensely with making this rational mathematical distinction in our daily lives? Evolutionary psychology explains that our ancient ancestors survived strictly through acute social belonging and perceived status within their tribal hunting groups. Consequently, a deep internal fear of missing out triggers the exact same neurological panic pathways as a physical predatory threat. When you visually observe a peer purchase a brand new vehicle, your brain automatically perceives a sudden loss of relative social standing. This powerful cognitive bias pushes you to consume aggressively simply to maintain your comfortable position within your perceived local social hierarchy. Furthermore, every digital purchase triggers a temporary chemical release of dopamine, creating a brief but highly addictive emotional high. We unconsciously begin to chase this fleeting chemical sensation, actively using retail therapy as a coping mechanism for modern occupational stress. A major myth is that buying progressively more expensive things will inevitably lead to a permanent, sustained increase in your personal happiness. The well-documented psychological phenomenon of hedonic adaptation practically guarantees that the thrill of a new purchase will inevitably fade away completely. How do we actively break this self-destructive cycle and establish a structural foundation for long-term generational capital accumulation? The foundational principle requires you to ruthlessly audit your current modern lifestyle and precisely separate biological survival from aesthetic preference. Consider aggressively implementing a mandatory 72-hour waiting period for any requested purchase that falls entirely outside of your basic survival matrix. This simple behavioral friction buffer allows the initial emotional dopamine spike to safely subside, giving cold rational logic time to fully engage. Next, consciously calculate the true operational cost of a want, not in printed currency, but in the actual hours of human labor required to acquire it. Bravely ask yourself if that specific luxury item is genuinely worth trading 40 hours of your finite, irreplaceable human lifespan. Another vital structural component is the conscious strategic prioritization of your specific desires, recognizing that you simply cannot have everything simultaneously. You can mathematically afford almost anything you truly want, but you absolutely cannot afford everything you want at the exact same time. True wealth building directly results from directing your surplus capital strictly toward the top 10% of your absolute most valued desires. Ruthlessly eliminate casual spending on the remaining 90% of passive societal wants that only provide mediocre, highly fleeting daily satisfaction. This highly deliberate capital allocation creates a powerful, growing margin of unspent capital, which then immediately becomes the rocket fuel for your investments. How exactly do you apply this rigid philosophy to modern daily life without living bitterly like a monk in total, absolute deprivation? The overarching goal is absolutely not to eliminate all human joy or to desperately hoard every single unit of currency you ever earn. Instead, the strategic objective is to massively maximize the utility and joy of every single dollar by spending with absolute, unyielding, conscious intention. Imagine aggressively living far below your means in consumption categories you care little about, strictly to invest heavily in the areas you deeply love. Proudly drive a highly reliable 10-year-old vehicle so you can easily afford to travel the globe for one full month every year. Or happily cook extremely modest meals at home 6 days a week merely to dine at a magnificent world-class restaurant on the 7th day. This highly selective frugality completely transforms your capital from a blunt tool of passive consumption into a precision surgical instrument for a designed life. Take a quiet moment right now to mentally review your own exact spending patterns over the past 30 days of your busy life. Honestly identify 3 specific financial transactions that you easily justified as necessary, which were fundamentally driven exclusively by an urge for comfort or status. What if you had firmly redirected that precise amount of liquid capital into an investment vehicle that compounds and grows silently over several decades? Deeply recognize that every single dollar casually spent on a forgotten, temporary want is a dollar permanently stolen from your own future personal freedom. By consciously mastering this single psychological internal boundary, you successfully transition from playing a stressful game of earning to a powerful game of building. The thin, invisible line between what we physically require to survive and what we emotionally desire to possess is the ultimate battleground of wealth. Defend that specific boundary line with brutal honesty, and you will eventually unlock the hidden surplus capital required to buy back your own time. Either you learn to master your endless wants, or your endless wants will forever remain the harsh master of your lifelong labor and energy. Please join us in the next episode as we thoroughly explore the mechanical magic of compound interest and the power of extended time horizons. Thank you very much for watching. This is Wealth Lexicon, education only, not financial advice.